Hello and welcome to the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1 US, a podcast in which we explore the mind-bending world of global supply chain, covering topics such as automation, innovation, unique identity, and more. I'm your co-host, Reed.
And I'm Liz.
And welcome to the show. Liz, they say if you can't beat them, join them.
They do. They do say that.
Yeah, I've heard that a few times myself. Our guest today is an internationally acclaimed speaker, college educator, and author of Marketing Rebellion, where he states that the most human company wins. Consumers are in the driver's seat. They're navigating both the purchase path as well as how your brand is consumed by others. And because 2/3 of your marketing happens without you, the experience you provide for them, both in person and via e-commerce, will determine your success. So on today's show, we're going to be talking with Mark Schaefer on how marketing can impact your supply chain. So without any further introductions, Mark, welcome to the show.
I am so delighted to be here with my GS1 friends. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Just first, we'd like to start by hearing about you and your career journey. How did you get to where you are today and how you're working with us?
Well, I had a long career in marketing with a company called Alcoa. Alcoa at the time was a Fortune 100 company, a Dow Jones Industrial. And it's probably no coincidence that after I left the company, it split up into pieces. But at the time, Alcoa was really a global titan, and I had a lot of great marketing jobs there. And we'll probably get into some of those stories today about how I learned that marketing and supply chain are just linked. They're just joined at the hip. Always. We always need to be aware of that. And then I started my own business. I started consulting and teaching. I teach in a special digital marketing program at Rutgers University that's actually open to anybody. We get some like graduate students, but it's called I think they call it the mini MBA in digital marketing. So that's available to anybody. And I've written 9 books. And because of the books have done pretty well, I'm invited to speak around the world, and that's been a lot of fun. And and then I got to do some work for GS1 last year, and just really came to love the people in the company and believe in your mission. And I love the energy and the heart of GS1, and I'm so excited to be talking to you today.
Mark, we're super happy to have you here as well. And, you are a marketing expert. You have multiple podcasts that you've been a part of. And on this podcast, we talk about next level supply chain. And it may seem like we don't have a lot in common to talk about, but we really do. And in your most recent book, you made the case that the most human company will win. What does that have to do with supply chain?
Well, that's a great question, because what are we trying to do in our companies today? I mean, the key to marketing traditionally has been what? Differentiation. Now, supply chain can be a big part of that, right? About where you sell it, how you sell it, how fresh it can be, how fast you can sell it. But one of the things I'm observing in this, where the speed of everything has amplified, the speed, the change has just increased, that when you get right down to it, your competitors can copy almost everything except how you treat your customers. And so I think one of the biggest, as we go forward out of this pandemic, and I do think the pandemic was a crossroads for the marketing relationship with the supply chain. There's so much we can talk about on this subject. But I think this integration between marketing and supply chain is more important than ever because the customer experience is everything. The customer experience is the only way in the long term we're going to be able to differentiate our products. So, I mean, they've got to be tied. And I hope everyone listening is forming good, meaningful relationships with your marketing peers in the company, because that is the marketing people need you. The marketing people, that's the future, this whole customer experience.
Excellent. Thank you.
It's crazy how we all learned in the past 18 months to do everything differently. So, like you said, from the way we grocery shop to the way we work to the way we travel or don't travel, and then interacting with the brands that we were or may have not been familiar with. And that actually, the segue to what I wanted to ask you next, how do you see that evolution of consumer behaviors and expectations changing business? And how business is meeting that expectation?
Oh my goodness. That is such an important question. And when I do my, coaching and consulting right now, I think one of the most important skills we can all have right now is humility, because I don't even look at any research that was conducted before 2020. 2020 and the pandemic, it was not an iteration. It was not an evolution. It was a reset. It was a new starting point for the future. So we can't look back at our Pareto charts that go back to, 2010 and predict what's going to be next. In terms of supply chain, we guessed wrong on almost everything going into the pandemic. Who would have guessed we'd have a run on lumber, right? Who would have thought we'd have a run on Clearasil because people's faces were breaking out because of the masks? We literally guessed wrong on everything. And coming out of the pandemic, we're guessing wrong again. It's going to take a generation for us to really see everything that's happening. And some things are obvious, the whole work situation. And like you said, Liz, we're renegotiating our relationship, with work, how we work, where we work, with our children, how we teach them, where they, how we learn, how we connect. We're renegotiating our relationship with food. Let's explore this for a minute and how it connects to supply chain. When the pandemic started, my wife and I actually got sick, and we got the coronavirus, and we were really ill. She was sick for about 2.5 weeks. I was sick after her for almost a month. We were locked into our home. We couldn't go to the store. So we started subscribing to HelloFresh. It's convenient. It's good quality. It's not that expensive. We had fun learning new recipes. And after the pandemic, we decided we liked it. We're going to keep doing it. And so a few meals every week we're getting from HelloFresh. Now, let's consider how profound this is, that we are now devoting a certain part of our food budget to a company and an entirely new supply chain we didn't know existed last January. Had no idea it even existed, and now it's part of our routine. I've written a lot about this. I've been studying this a lot. We are in the era of unintended consequences. Psychologically, sociologically, physiologically, we've changed. One of the things that is just, let me give you one little example of something that I think, again, is how is this all going to play out? Before the pandemic, 20% of adults in America said they had chronic sleeping problems. Today, it's 60%.
Wow.
And it's because people's sleeping habits have changed. They're working different hours. Their relationship with alcohol has changed. How they consume content is changing. We've got accumulated anxiety and stress. What's the implication for our business when 60% of our customers are irritable? What's the implication when 60% of our truck drivers and our data people aren't getting enough sleep? What about the long-term implications? I mean, and that is just one little piece of a very complex cocktail that's going to be working to change our world really over the next 10 years. So that sort of reiterates this point I made to Reed, that right now we have to be humble. We have to just pay attention. We cannot count on the past to think about how our operations are going to be moving into the future. We have to be really, and that's another reason why we've got to be tied together with the marketing department to be in tune with these tiny little things that could blow up into big problems and changes.
I think that's a great segue to Liz and I were talking prior to the call. Is what we need to do new things, right? And we have to change the way we're doing it. But what are some of the outdated ideas that we could archive to make room for new ones when it comes to connecting with customers? Because we have to drop some things. And, you mentioned not looking at reports prior to 2020 because it doesn't apply to.
It doesn't even make sense. No, it doesn't even make sense. Well, the biggest mindset change, I think, is how we approach strategy. And it's because of these changes that are going on. If you look at, if there was a magazine that said the year in supply chain, I mean, it would look like hell raining from the skies, right? I mean, you got pandemic and you got ice storms and you've got, ports closed because of COVID. You got ships stuck in a canal, right? And it almost makes me wonder if that's the new normal, if that like these bizarre things, if bizarre is sort of the new normal. I don't think we can really dismiss that the rate of change in the world is just so fast and the world is so interconnected in such a fragile way that a lot of the systems we had in the past we may have to rethink it. And I think especially when it comes in terms of supply chain strategy. So one of the things I'm encouraging my customers to do, and actually I wrote about this extensively in a new book I have called Cumulative Advantage. Thanks, by the way, for mentioning Marketing Rebellion. But in Cumulative Advantage, I'm talking about momentum. How do we build momentum from these changes? And when I was a young guy growing up in business, strategy was a 250-page document and a 5-year plan. And today, it's being in tune with these shifts and then applying our best talent, our best competency and resources into those shifts. You soar through those shifts, and that is new business opportunity. So there's an analogy that I use in the book that strategy today is like American football. And you don't have to understand American football to kind of get this depiction, this illustration. So in American football, two teams line up face to face, strength against strength. Now the coaches are actually in a booth above the field and they're looking at the other team seeing, is there a weakness? Is there an opportunity? Is someone tired? Is someone out of place? Is someone mismatched? Then how can we use that opportunity to like blow open a hole that our team can run through as fast as they can, get as much gain for as long as they can, and then they start looking for another opportunity. All right. Mm-hmm. Now, we can't have 5-year plans anymore. If you just look at what's happened in the last 2 years as a template for the future, and I do believe it is, we have got to be thinking about strategy in a radically different way. And this is another example of why, working with the marketing department on these shifts is so important. You can look at this HelloFresh example, right? HelloFresh, they existed. That supply chain existed before the pandemic. All of a sudden, there's a fracture in the status quo. In fact, arguably, it's the biggest fracture in the status quo in the history of the human race, a global pandemic. Now, what did HelloFresh do? They burst through with all their might, with all their strength, with all their power. They promoted, they advertised, they were on TV, they doubled down on their supply chain, on all their partners, right? That's what they had to do. Dominate that new opportunity by running through that hole as fast as you can. There's going to be lots of implications for the supply chain going forward because of the speed of change, because of the complexity of change, and just being humble, watching for those changes, being nimble and open to change is going to be the future of success for the supply chain.
Do you think that some companies got it right and some companies didn't?
Well, I like that question because it comes back to Reed's comment about the most human company and what is really differentiating people right now and how that connects to how we serve them. So we saw two types of responses to the pandemic. We had a lot of big companies and a lot of famous brands come out and say, we're with you in these unprecedented times. And there was actually a YouTube video that was created called All Pandemic Advertising is the Same. And they had all these cuts between, they used the same music and they used the same words. And at some point, everybody's just rolling their eyes saying, do something. Don't just tell me, be responsive, right? So this gets back to this point. How we treat people is the only way we differentiate. It's the only way we can differentiate. So the companies that are succeeding, the companies that are transcending these changes are the ones that are rolling up their sleeves and they're saying, we're not just in a community. We're just not going to donate. We're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to be of the community. What does our world really need right now? How do we respond right now? Not 2 years from now. How are we present and tuned into where our customers are in this moment? Now, many of the companies that are succeeding, honestly, small to medium-sized companies, because they can be more nimble. They can be more flexible. Some of the bigger companies, it's like turning around an aircraft carrier. It's easy. The easy thing to do is take out an ad and say, we're with you in these unprecedented times. The hard thing is to roll up your sleeves and react and make those changes in the supply chain, to respond to what's happening right now.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to come back to this pandemic topic, but I'm going to shift gears here just a little bit. And I know we started talking with you, we're actually a little bit before the pandemic started and kind of came into it. But what struck you about our mission at GS1 US and and our work, what surprised you since because we've been interacting with you and getting
Mm-hmm.
some consultative advice from you for quite some time now. And so,
Mm-hmm.
what is it that struck you about our mission, and what has surprised you about the work that we do?
Well, I think the thing that is most meaningful to me is the emphasis on safety. This is a mega trend. We are being rewired right now in our world. And I think one of the predominant needs of consumers going forward is assurance, comfort, safety, um, uh, hygiene, in every aspect of the supply chain. We're looking at, for example, food delivery systems where people don't touch things anymore, right? It takes some reinvention, some reimagination to keep all these parts moving. We want to be efficient. We want to be fast. We want to keep our costs low, but we've also got to adjust. So it's like everything about GS1 gets down to protection and safety. And I can't really think of a bigger need in our world right now than safety in the supply chain. So it's important. It's a very worthwhile mission.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate that. And it's, one of the reasons I came to GS1 US after 25 years in IT was it's still on the cutting edge. I mean, we do a lot of the everyday stuff, and standards for some folks don't seem that really exciting. But once you put that standard out there, then everybody, all industry gets to really move. And you're right, it's safety. And right now, I think that there's a lot of trust issues in the world that we're all trying to address. So,
yeah. Yeah, So, I mean, safety and assurance is going to be big for really every industry I can think of.
Yeah. It doesn't skip anybody.
Mm-hmm. No, it doesn't. And one of the other topics that we see, just being one of those conversation starters, that's the sprinkle, the seeds, they're aligning with those social values like diversity and sustainability. So what are your observations based on all of the research and reading that you've done regarding that, more from like product versus like corporate social responsibility, like, how sustainability in product, farm to fork? What do you think about that?
Well, I have some rather controversial views about that, because one of the things that I observe is that a lot of times marketing people flock to whatever's popular until they ruin it. And I think the thing they're flocking to now is purpose. And purpose is something that should not bend with the wind. The reason that we listen to Patagonia when it comes to anything about the environment is because we believe them. We know that that is part of the DNA of the company. So I think that many companies are really risking their brand if they try to just bend to whatever's happening at the moment. It's got to be part of your DNA. It's got to be, from the top of the company to the bottom of the company to the founding story of why you exist. This idea of what you stand for and your purpose, you're just not going to be believed if you're bending all the time. And, right. I guess some of the early companies would make all these fantastic, like, environmental claims and this idea of greenwashing, right? And I observed it plenty of that in my life, where they sort of, paint a beautiful picture. Meanwhile, they're still big polluters. And today in our social media environment, there are no secrets. Everyone is a reporter. Today the definition of being a reporter is, I was there and you weren't. Here's what I have on my iPhone, right? And so the idea of taking a stand and aligning with purpose, it is a very, very serious decision. It can't be just a marketing strategy or a marketing tactic. It's got to be adopted and believed from, really in the DNA of the company.
I am so glad to hear you say that. A lot of times out there, I spent 25 years in sales, and sales gets a bad rap, like, oh, salespeople lie and blah, blah, blah. And marketing, I think, takes a little of that rap as well. But I've seen that greenwashing. I actually got my environmental science degree from Rutgers as well.
Oh, wow.
And was very proud of it and used it. But you start to see these marketing tactics, and I'm like, it's just greenwashing. Like they're not really doing that. It's like the whole, who's behind the curtain in this thing. It's really, there's nothing back there after the Wizard of Oz. So I'm really glad to hear you say that. And I think that there are companies out there doing it. Apple comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Apple's a company that's about their consumers' privacy. And they get a lot of following for that. I'd like to ask you, go ahead. You had a
well. There's one other comment I wanted to make about that, is that the one area where Apple took some hits, at least a few years ago, and their brand took a few hits, was connected to their corporate stands were not aligned with some of their supply chain practices. Mm-hmm. And so that's another important point, Reed, is that if you're planning to align your messaging around some purpose, you've got to have everything lined up. You can't be, operating some sweatshop in a third world country and talk about, civil rights and all this stuff. You've got to be aligned. Like I said, it's just got to be really embedded in your DNA, not just marketing. Every piece of the company.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot on our circular economy conversations that we're having with companies and businesses, and we're going to have an episode just on that.
Yeah, that would be exciting to hear.
I have a question for you related to social media. So our first episode was with Dr. Sanjay Sarma from MIT, and we talked about how toilet paper broke the supply chain. I'd like to know your perspective on social media's impact on supply chains, intentional and unintentional.
Mm-hmm. I have this image in my mind of like someone driving a car and they're pushing the brakes and the accelerator at the same time, and you just don't know what's going to happen next. Everything's going to be jerking around. Unfortunately, we're in a world where there is no shared reality. That, back when I was a young guy, there were 3 network television stations and a daily newspaper, and everybody kind of got their information from the same place. And today, in social media, we can surround ourselves with media and ideas and news that conform to a certain worldview. And it may be accurate, it may be factual, or it may not. And I've been able to witness firsthand how even well-meaning, mature people will make an observation, but they made the wrong conclusion, spread the wrong information, and then you can't take it back. So, so this is another example of what we've been talking about, of how this bizarro world is kind of the new normal, because that, just information or misinformation can jerk a supply chain around. I remember the first time I ever realized that the world was really crazy now was there was this person who reported that there was an earthquake, and they saw a tweet about the earthquake before the earthquake hit them.
Wow.
Right? So there was the epicenter, and by the time they got this earthquake, wherever they were, they already had seen a tweet about it, and then they felt the earthquake. So that's our world today. That's the world today.
There you go, people. Mark Schaefer just predicted the future on our show.
No, no wonder people can't sleep too, right? Like,
Yeah.
they're hearing about earthquakes before they feel them.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so it is, there's no good answer. There isn't. There's no good solution. In fact, I think it's going to get worse. I mean, it's going to get much worse. I think, before we ever have a hope of it getting better. I think there's going to have to be some, element of regulation. There's just no other way around it. And I know people hate to hear the idea of internet and regulation, but we've seen this pattern repeat over and over and over throughout history, where media companies, they can't regulate themselves, they can't monitor themselves. Where corruption can occur, corruption will occur, and you're going to have to step in with regulation.
Yeah. So my question, and thank you for that. My question, we like to ask our guests this question here, and every time we get the answers, we're like, "Whoa! I'm so glad we asked the question." But it's around.
Don't put any pressure.
No pressure here, Mark. No pressure whatsoever. But no, it's really, I want you to either think back to like when you were a child, or some part or moment within your life where you had an experience or you learned something new and it just broke your brain. Like it just made you think completely different. What's something that broke your brain?
Somebody, I actually was thinking about this the other day, because somebody interviewed me on a podcast and they said, "Mark, you just seem like such a calm and accessible and friendly guy. Have you always been that way? Or was there like some mindset change?" And I thought about it, and actually there was an event that sort of changed me. Like when I was a young man, I was climbing up the corporate ladder, and, might have been a little jerky in some ways. And, so I was being groomed to be an executive with this company. And so I was in all this executive training, and I was in this one training program, and they wanted us to talk about our emotions. And I didn't want to talk about my emotions. And I was frankly just getting, I wanted just to get out of there. So the teacher came beside me, and this was a very wise man who eventually became a lifelong mentor to me. I was probably in my late 20s. And he came up to me and he said, "Mark, what would you say is the emotion you feel most of your life?" And I said, "Anxiety. Why wouldn't I feel anxiety? I have all this work waiting for me, and I'm sitting here in this stupid class, right?" So I was a bit of a smart person, smart ass, I guess. Can I say that on the show? Just did.
I think so.
And, and I turned to him and I said, "What's the emotion you feel most of the time?" And he said, "Joy." And I knew he was right. This is a man who exuded joy. And I thought, what am I doing? Why have I built my life to feel anxiety? And from that moment, I had a new goal for my life. And I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be able to live a life where I could say, the feeling I have most of the time is joy. And so that meant making decisions that would trade maybe business opportunities for joy, business opportunities for family, and, things that mean something in the long term of life. And so, I mean, everything has worked out great. I have a great career. I have fun every day, but I do make decisions where I'm leaving money on the table sometimes because it's not moving me toward joy. It's moving me toward anxiety, and I don't want to do that anymore.
We really appreciate you sharing that with us. It definitely brings the humanity side to it. And it is, we only have one life to live. This isn't a dress rehearsal. And we hit that midlife and we're like, so that's a great story. And I really appreciate you sharing it. So we've kind of run out of time for today. I want to thank Mark for being our guest and to dropping some wisdom. And just to recap a couple of things, it's, the customer experience is something, you can copy everything, but not the way you treat your customers. You can't copy that. Have humility. Stop looking at reports prior to 2020. They don't really apply to post-pandemic. Bizarre may be the new normal. Bizarre is the new normal. That'll be interesting. And look for the gaps. Look for the open gaps. 5-year strategies, or we're going to have to take the competent, right people, right resources, and try to explode through those gaps when they present themselves. So, Mark, on behalf of Liz and I and the rest of the team, we want to thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you. I just turned 60, so thank you for characterizing me as middle-aged. There's a lot of hope in that statement.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1US. If you enjoyed today's show, you can subscribe to our feed or explore more great episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to share and follow us on